The Big Fella Weight Loss Podcast is the place for real, open and honest talk about weight loss and GLP-1 medication. Subscribe now and don't miss an episode. Welcome everybody to episode 4 of the Big Fella Weight Loss Podcast. My name is Barry and I'm on a weight loss journey with the help of Mounjaro. I've lost over 7 stone in 6 months so far, and this is my space to share with you some of my experiences on this journey. Welcome back to any previous listeners. Thank you if you are still tuning in, and welcome along to any new ones. If you do enjoy the podcast, please consider dropping me a little review, and if you're on TikTok, you can follow me over there at bigfella_baz. That's at bigfella_baz. And if you haven't yet listened to any of the previous episodes, do consider going back, giving them a listen. Episode 1 give you a little bit more about me and my battles with weight loss over the years. Episode 2 covered my first few weeks on Mounjaro. And last week we talked about how Mounjaro has changed my eating habits and what my sort of eating routine is like now compared to what it was before. So if you haven't listened to those, consider giving them a go. They're all 20 to 30 minutes, so little short episodes that you can pick up and listen to on your way to work. This week I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the side effects of the medication, talking about the common side effects and my experiences so far when it comes to side effects. First up though, as always, I like to take a look back at how my last week's went. I'll give you my results from the scales and sort of talk about the highs and lows, what went well, what went not so well, so my reflections on the previous week. So that was week 28 now, I think, for me. I'm starting to lose count now. So a little over 6 months on Mounjaro now for me. Week 28, I was still on 7.5 milligrams of Mounjaro. I'm at a point now where I'm feeling like it might be time for me to move up. I've got that decision to make in the next few days. So it may be 10 milligrams from next week. But on the scales this week, I lost a pound. 1 pound takes me to 7 stone and 4 pounds lost now in 28 weeks. So 102 pounds, I think, in total. It was a good result for me. 1 pound was fine. It's probably the lowest loss I've had in quite some time. But one I was absolutely fine with, and for a few reasons. I had a big loss the week before. 4 pound loss was a big one for me. If you'd offered me £5 over 2 weeks, I'd have snapped your hand off. And I quite often follow bigger losses with small ones, so not hugely unexpected. The other reason, I was out for a meal on last Saturday. It was my mum's birthday, so I sort of indulged a little bit more than I would usually, particularly on a weekend. Enjoyed what I ate, but didn't suffer any major consequences. Still made sensible choices. So yeah, 1 pound off, and as I say, 7 stone 4, still pushing towards that 8 stone mark. We'll see how this week goes, but a bit more challenging because I've got to work away for a lot of this week. So there, we'll see what happens there. I did think earlier about how smaller losses would have bothered me in the past on any kind of diet. You know, a pound would have been a bit disappointing. And I think having got so far, I'm quite more laid back now about it all. Trust the process. I know what I'm doing is going to work. And having done really well so far, I'm now in a lot less of a hurry. I've lost a big chunk of what I need to lose. Still got lots to lose, but I'm far more relaxed about that now because I'm starting to feel more comfortable in my body and I know it's coming off. So, yeah, definitely dealing better with the scales now than I would have done previously. Now, I do also like to look at the highs and lows of the previous week, looking at what went well, what went not so well. And one of the highs was a non-scale victory. I bought a new belt this week. I started this diet with my leather belt, and I was on one of the first holes on that belt, and I've moved down it and down it and down it, and then I've punched 2 more holes into that old belt. and eventually it was getting a little bit too long, so I decided it was time to buy a new belt. So I did buy a new belt this week, so that's a success. Shows I made progress. Another positive was getting back some sort of structure into my meals. I'd mentioned last week how I was sort of a little bit all over the place, just eating as and when, and sort of not having sort of balanced meals that I would like to be having, and particularly for my main meal. I did use the Gusto box to sort of get a bit more variety in and a bit more balance to the evening meals. Portion controlled meals, under 600 calories, and as I say, a good bit of variety. I do find those meal prep boxes can be useful sometimes, not all of the time. I tend to use them when there's a good deal on. But just to sort of get me back on track, a little bit of a reset and get some different kind of meals into a Gusto, HelloFresh, or good options occasionally. I wouldn't buy them every week, but if you need to mix things up a little bit, then they're a decent option. I can get you a discount for Gusto. Have a look at my profile if that's of interest. Not an advert, I should say. I do pay for them all. Now, the lower points, and I think that there's no real lows, nothing I would describe as a low, but definitely things I could improve upon. Last week, I got out of my routine in terms of exercise. I think that's been the case for the last 2 weeks since the kids have went back to school. A lot more going on, kids' activities, football, all of those sort of things. And trying to fit in the gym and the swim around that hasn't worked particularly well. So I do need to think a bit more about how I can fit it in and make sure we get back on track this week, because it was going well with the gym and the swimming. So I need to make sure I put that back in there to get things, keep that momentum going. Got to build on the exercise. So yeah, more exercise in the next week, hopefully. Stay tuned next week to find out how that goes. So, moving on to this week's topic then. Side effects of Mounjaro is what we're going to talk about for a short while today. Or side effects of GLP-1 medication in general, as the side effects on Wegovy, which is becoming more popular due to price changes recently. Those side effects are going to be very similar. And first things first, I'm not a medical professional. This is just my thoughts and my experiences on side effects. Needless to say, if anyone has any real concerns about side effects, you should definitely speak to a medical professional and not listen to me. So, I mean, if you're on Mounjaro, you'll be well aware of what the common side effects are. But for someone who's possibly considering starting it, you might find this a little bit more interesting, because if you are considering starting, you could be forgiven for being a little bit anxious by the amount of talk there is around side effects on these sort of medications. Because you could go onto the forums and you'd feel like everybody is suffering drastically with stuff. And that's not necessarily the case. But if you look at the leaflet for the medication, it will tell you some of the common side effects. Things like headaches, fatigue, nausea, sulfur burps, diarrhea, constipation, vomiting, stomach pains, heartburn, indigestion, jab site reactions. Sounds awful, doesn't it? To be fair, if you look at the side effects for most medications, even antibiotics, paracetamol, there will be lots of stuff in there that could sort of strike some fear into you. So it does sound bad if you read all of those, and certainly if you got all of them at once, I'm sure it would be. But of course, that's not the reality for most people. As I say, if you go looking around at the forums, you'll read a lot of stories about side effects. You'll find people who have really bad experiences with side effects. But you have to remember the vast majority of people are probably managing just fine. But those people aren't going to go on the forums just to tell everyone that everything's fine. So you're always going to see more of those with issues in those sort of areas. Now, I thought I'd talk about what side effects I've experienced and what steps I've taken to manage them. And I'll start by mentioning that it's often one of the first things people ask. If I tell someone I'm on Mounjaro, what side effects do you have? Does it make you really ill? Those are the sort of questions that come up over and over again. And my stock response is to tell people I haven't had any issues, or I don't get any side effects. Now, that's a very small lie, because I have had side effects. But I think what I mean by that response, when I respond to people, is that I haven't had any meaningful issues. There's been nothing that's been persistent or particularly concerning, and nothing that would consider me thinking, is this what I want to do? But if I answered the question by saying to someone, oh yeah, I've had diarrhea, constipation, indigestion, headaches, nausea, sulfur burps, they'd think I was mad. They'd think, why are you continuing with this medication? But the reality is, these are very small episodes, mild sort of experiences over a 6 month period of time. So my experiences have been very short-term side effects. The first thing I noticed in my journey was tiredness and headaches, probably in the first week or two. But nothing significant, nothing drastic. Paracetamol dealt with those things. Sulfur burps was quite a regular feature in my early weeks, but again, it was the odd day here and there, nothing persistent. I think I can recall one day on the whole of my 6 months where I've had really bad nausea, where I felt really sick and really couldn't eat that day, but it was one day. And I have had the occasional bout of heartburn, but to be honest, I've suffered badly with heartburn for years and years, mainly due to a poor diet. So, I take esomeprazole for that. And I could say comfortably the number of heartburn episodes I've had whilst on Mounjaro is significantly lower than it was before. But I can often work out the types of foods that have triggered that as well. And then there's the bowel movement. I have had bouts of constipation at times, maybe a few days at a time. One thing I find, and some people will take different things, Movicol or these different sort of medications which might help get you moving. I haven't bothered with any of that. One thing I always find actually gets me moving okay is my jab day. I can almost guarantee within 24 hours of my jab, things will loosen up and I'll be back on the toilet having no issues at all. Diarrhea has featured a little bit, but mostly in the earlier days, and I think that was possibly my body just adjusting to a different kind of diet. So again, nothing prolonged or nothing concerning in particular. So I would say in my first month is probably where I experienced little bits of various side effects. Nothing serious, nothing prolonged. And I started to sort of work out the possible triggers for those side effects and solutions that might work for me. And that's possibly why I sit here now, not really suffering much, and why I would tell people I don't have any side effects. I haven't had any side effects because it doesn't feature much in my mind, because it's not impacted me at all, really. Now, there is one side effect, which I haven't mentioned yet, which has affected me later in the journey. So this is one that I had no issues with at all for about the first 4 months of my journey. And it's a jab site reaction. So I had 2.5 milligrams for 5 weeks, no issues. 5 milligrams for 10 weeks, no issues. I moved to 7.5 milligrams, always jabbing my belly. And the first time on 7.5 milligrams, I got a rash around. And I would say maybe 4 to 5 centimeters across, nothing massive, but around the jab site, a rash that was red, slightly raised, and it just got a little bit itchy and annoying. Nothing painful, nothing hugely concerning. It wasn't massive, it wasn't spreading, it wasn't getting bigger, it didn't look infected. But I got this rash, and I sort of brushed it off. I was like, oh, well, that's a little unfortunate. See what happens next week. Maybe we had a dodgy needle or something. Next week, 7.5 milligrams, same thing again. Different jab site, still in my belly, opposite side, same rash. And this continued on and on for about 5 or 6 weeks, always on 7.5 milligrams. So I thought I would try somewhere else. I went in my leg for the first time, and I still got the rash. So I moved back to my belly, because I thought, well, let's just go back to what we normally do, because changing site wasn't going to work. And then I've sort of looked into it a little bit more and thought about what else I could do. It's not a major issue. Again, it's not something that would make me consider having to come off the medication or anything. But I started taking antihistamines on jab day. So I take my jab, I take an antihistamine. The following day I'll take an antihistamine, and sometimes I'll take it on the third day. This rash normally sticks around for 4 or 5 days, but is most irritable in the first day or two. The antihistamines are definitely helping. There's not as much itch in there, and it doesn't bother me so much, but it's still there. One other thing I've sort of considered, and someone else had suggested, is possibly a bigger needle. The standard needles that come with the pens are 4mm, and someone had suggested possibly a 6mm or 8mm, so that needle's going in that little bit further, and that the medication is a little bit further then from the surface of the skin. So I might try that in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, that's been a strange one, because it didn't bother me at all on the earlier doses. But since 7.5, it's been every single week. So yeah, something a bit different there. it is mentioned in the leaflet as a common side effect, which could affect up to 1 in 10 people. So I haven't got any massive concerns around it. It's just a little bit annoying. But anyway, a few sort of key tips from me about things that have worked for me on this journey in terms of trying to relieve symptoms or prevent side effects coming along. Hydration is the obvious one, really. Same with any diet. We should always be drinking lots of water, shouldn't we? And I think possibly a lack of hydration could have been the contributing factor to my headaches early on, because I probably wasn't thinking about the fluid intake as much as I was the food intake. So hydration, drink plenty of water. In terms of any sort of indigestion, sulfur burps, nausea, I found a pattern when I did have this. It was always on a Tuesday. It was always the day after my jab day. And particularly, it would happen if I had a heavy meal on the Monday evening. And I talk about heavy meal. It's not a heavy meal in terms of what it would used to be previously. But I do find if I have a bigger meal, it seems to be that the indigestion will come around, and then potentially the nausea. Or the sulfur burps, because you've got that food sitting there undigested because your digestion is so much slower. So I've changed my sort of eating routine a little bit. I jab on a Monday, and my routine now keeps my meals quite light on a Sunday and on a Monday. So before my jab and after my jab, I make sure I'm eating more little and often, lighter meals, not massive portions of potatoes, pastas, rice, things like that, just so that the digestion becomes a little bit easier. And that seems to have made a big difference for me. Jab day and the day after are always going to be the days where you've got most medication in your system, and I just find making things a little bit easier for my digestive system helps keep away a few of those potential issues. So that's what's worked for me in those respects. I have had to use Pepto-Bismol once or twice in the early days for those sulfur burps or the indigestion, but more recently, no issues at all, and I find sort of lightening the load a little bit over the jab around the jab day is what works for me. Constipation, well, I've had that a few times. I know what I should be doing. I need more fibre. I know I struggle with fibre. I don't get enough into my diet. So that is something I need to work on, and we'll get there. I have recently invested in a NutriBullet to try and blitz up some fruit and veg into my shake. Fruit into my shakes and seeds and things like that to get more fibre in, and that might help on that front. But that's it really in terms of my experience of side effects and how I've tried to deal with it. And as I said at the start, if someone is looking to start out on a medicated weight loss journey with Mounjaro or Wegovy, they could be forgiven for worrying about those side effects. You will find many stories online of people who've had to deal with significant issues and people who've had to come off the medication. But in reality, there are loads of us who have no issues at all or have really minimal issues that don't really impact things at all. Most people are able to manage with any of these minor side effects just fine. Now, everybody's different. My experience will not necessarily be the same as yours would be. My key point really is side effects are going to be part of the journey, more than likely. For most people, you will suffer something to some extent. But for most of us, it's entirely manageable and fairly insignificant. And the benefits of being on this medication far, far outweighs the impact of any of the side effects. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that. Another episode done. Thanks to anyone who's made it this far. That was a little bit on my experiences with side effects on Mounjaro. If you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, then do consider doing so, or leaving a review for the podcast wherever you are listening to it. Otherwise, I hope you'll be back for next week's episode. I think I'm planning on talking a little bit more about exercise and how I've sort of built that into my journey and what I've done from the start and where I'm at now with exercise and what I plan going forward. So that'll be episode 5 next week. This one's been out a little bit later because I've had a busy week with work, so we should be back to normal next week. But once again, thank you very much for listening. And for now, I'll catch up with you next week. Cheers.